Hello and welcome to Get a Shift On. This week I am really pleased to welcome Tiarnan McKeever, who was a qualified doctor. He never worked clinically, but has built a healthcare marketing agency using his medical knowledge and all the years in medical school. This was a calculated exit and it looked very different to the normal medical route.
Before we get stuck in, a quick word about today's sponsor, Cassie. Here's a question for you. Have you ever thought billboard advertising was way out of your league? Yeah, me too. It turns out it's not. Cassie lets you advertise on 1.5 million screens globally. Billboards, gyms, train stations, you name it. You get to pick the locations, set your budget, anything from £80, and only pay when your ad plays. No agencies, no negotiations, simple. I'm using it for the podcast and for my work with Vianova. Honestly, the process is so easy. If you want to try it, head over to my stand store. There'll be a link in the episode description and you can find out how easy it is. Right, back to the show.
Tiarnan, thank you ever so much for joining me on the show.
Thanks so much for having me on. Looking forward to having the conversation.
Yeah, I'm really interested to hear about how you went from medical school to having your own business. For my listeners and viewers, can you just give us a brief overview of where you were and how you've ended up where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was at medical school, very early on, I made the decision that I needed to do something alongside studying. Initially started as I needed some extra money just to cover rent, basically. And from that became hold on a second, I'm actually able to build something from this. I've kind of found a nice niche area where I've got skills that aren't necessarily easy for other people to develop quite quickly. So it initially started as a side hustle, just a way to get some income. And then very quickly became hold on, I think this might be the direction I want to move in going forward. So yeah, decided kind of halfway through medical school that this was going to be the path that I was going to take as soon as I graduated.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. And I think obviously fairly early days when you decided that you were going to move, what made you stay in medical school and not just kind of give up and just move into the business world straight away?
So I think two things. One was I had already completed 3 years or almost 4 years. And by that point, it's almost, if you just complete one and a bit more, you do the 5 years, something finalized. So that was certainly an aspect of it. I think also the other aspect was getting the 2 letters in front of your name and having gone through medical training holds so much weight everywhere else. In my area specifically, because all of the clients we work with are typically doctors. So it's very different me showing up to them as a doctor as well compared to not doing that. So that was certainly in the back of my mind too. But more so, I had already started it. I wanted to finish it regardless of whether I was going to practice clinically or not.
But looking back to when you first went to medical school, what was it that attracted you to medicine? Is it something you chose? Is it something you were forced into? Why medicine in the first place?
So I always was interested in languages. That was the thing that I was most interested in doing, I think, early on. I then got a bit of an interest in economics. So my original plan was that I wanted to do a language of some sort plus economics somewhere. I then did really well at like GCSE level or just above that as well, and had the kind of parents say, well, maybe you should think about doing medicine, because no one else in the family had done it. No one else really in my school applied to do medicine even. So it was almost someone needs to go and do medicine. It's the hard thing to do. And I kind of thought, well, if it's the hard thing to do, then I'll be the one that does it. I was also interested in psychology and the kind of psychiatry aspect that was always interesting to me. So I remember my personal statement writing about that, the kind of psychology side of things and potentially being interested in mental health services. But it was more of it's the hard thing to do. So I'll do it rather than I have a burning desire to go into this field, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, I think it does. And you've already touched on 2 things there that I think are so important for people looking to start a business and grow a business. You said you weren't going to give up when you were already halfway through medical school. So you've got that real perseverance and wanting to see it through. And then also you've just said that it was the hard thing to do. And so you clearly like a challenge. And I think those 2 things, the challenge and the perseverance, are so key to any entrepreneur building a business that they stick with it and just keep going, because there are hard times. I think we all know there are those really hard times. What's the hardest thing you faced when you told people that you were leaving medicine?
I had very mixed reactions, I would say. A lot of people around me completely backed the idea right away because they had essentially seen me work 16-hour days all throughout medical school because I was doing medicine and then in the evenings trying to build a business. So it wasn't like a new idea, or it didn't seem as risky, I think, to some people because they kind of thought, well, you've already built the foundations and done some work. It didn't feel like I was kind of taking a leap of faith as much as it might have. I had a lot of people in medicine, specifically some mentors who suggested I kind of just do foundation training or just do specialty training or just then become a consultant and then think about what I wanted to do afterwards. I had one mentor specifically who gave me that advice, and it kind of really rubbed me the wrong way because I kind of thought, well, I don't want to just do something for the next 20 years for the
Just
sake of
because.
just doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Parents as well, they were kind of, it was about, is this the right idea? But that came more from a sense of security, I think, rather than anything else. As kind of, I think every parent would probably give the same advice if someone turned around and said that. So I certainly I didn't have much people who were like, this is a very bad idea, that actually knew me quite well. And actually at university, even lots of the people I spoke to were very supportive about it.
I think the advice we often get from family, v friends, v the people that have been there and done it is always so different. And I often say to people, parents absolutely would give that loving advice. But the chances are they're probably not entrepreneurs themselves, probably haven't been through exactly what you're going through. So their fear is rational to them, but makes no sense when you are on that path. And of course, they just want to care for you. Like, I've got kids. I know that, I would give them the best advice I could. It's always based on loving, whether it's right or wrong. And usually it's wrong. I have teenage children, so I'm usually the bad guy at the minute. But I think that's par for the course. And our friends, I think, especially when you say that they were very supportive, they're there with you, seeing what you're doing, seeing how hard you're working. And I think then it gives them a real sense of pride in what you're doing and actually some motivation to maybe do something themselves. I want to just go back to medical school. And obviously, you started the side hustle, needed some extra rent money. I think we've probably all been there, fairly standard. But even just extra cash is, key at the minute. Was there a moment where you had that idea and it was really born into life? Or was it something you thought about for some time before doing it?
I think a bit of both. I think there's a series of moments where it became a bit more prominent. One was, I remember I was sitting in a urology clinic with a consultant urologist, and they were speaking about an app that they had developed, but had no users for. And I naturally just said, well, what have you done to try to get users? And they kind of said, well, nothing. And I thought, okay, there's a gap here somewhere. Like there's people who are making great products or have a great service or are great clinicians, but they don't seem to understand but we now need to be proactive and go seek out users. Just being a good doctor alone won't necessarily mean people come to you. So that was one aspect of it. I then also started tutoring in order to get some extra money, and I didn't want to go through the usual companies because I knew they would take such a high mark on the cost. So I thought I'll make my own social media page and try to grow that, and then did grow it quite quickly. But that was my, hold on a second, I'm good at this. Let me explore it a bit further and see where else I can use this skill of just being able to grow an Instagram page from nothing in order to get some new tutoring students.
How quickly did that Instagram page grow?
Well, by comparison now, not very quickly. It was something like 5,000 followers in the space of a year, or maybe a bit more, which isn't a huge amount of growth, but it was enough for me to kind of say, well, I've kind of worked out some things that work and what maybe doesn't work. And there's probably someone else that could use that for their own page or for their own business.
So we've kind of talked about where you are now, but we haven't really said what it is you actually do now. So can you just explain your company, what it does, and how it's grown to be quite as successful as it is?
Yeah, so healthcare marketing agency, digital marketing specifically. Predominant what we do is ads on either Google or ads on social media. for specifically healthcare businesses. So about 70% of the people we work with are private healthcare providers, mostly doctor-led services, so medical or surgical. And we also work with some other companies here in medical education, so doctors who have set up uh, companies who provide educational resources for students or doctors, financial resources, coaches, consultants, that sort of thing. We essentially come in and do their marketing, either limited to ads or sometimes organic social media strategy as well, and some consulting work. And we're basically bridging the gap between, there's lots of really good marketers out there. There's people who understand healthcare, but there are very few people who are really good at marketing and also understand healthcare.
Healthcare is such a specific niche, and having worked in it for so long, I know there is such discord really between medics and business as a whole. So I think what you're bringing is so vitally important. When you spoke to those clinicians all those years ago about their app that they built, how did they take the feedback and thoughts that you were giving them?
So the clinic that I had that initial conversation with, or rather the consultant, that didn't go anywhere further. It kind of sprung the idea in my head, and I sat on it for a while. Um, but I have found in the early days, I remember I think I sent something close to 600 emails as like cold emails to try to get my first client on board. In general, even just being a medical student gave me a bit of a leg up. I think doctors were much more receptive to the idea of me helping them or doing something just because we were within the same field. And I have actually found over time a lot of the people we speak with, obviously it's a bit different now because we've got case studies and a bit of a reputation in some areas. So people are very receptive, but I haven't seen too many people be kind of unreceptive. If anything, people are often like, I actually don't know anything about this area and I want someone to come in and just tell me what needs to be done.
Yeah, I think it's so important, isn't it, to have that parity between the medical world and the medical background and turn it into a commercial asset, which you clearly have done. And I think a lot of doctors, especially traditionally, really struggle with that. What I see now is more and more younger doctors wanting to have multiple income streams, lifestyle medicine, coaching, you know, businesses as a whole entrepreneur. Why do you think that's happening at this moment in time?
I think a few things. I think the shape that the NHS is in, specifically related to doctors in terms of training position availability and the workload expectations, which haven't necessarily changed, but people have become a bit more aware of in terms of maybe wanting work-life balance a bit more than what people might have focused on previously. If you pair that keener interest in work-life balance with the hold on a second, I might have done this degree and I might be unemployed for some part of next year, naturally people start kind of turning their heads slightly and looking at what else is out there.
Do you think healthcare is struggling to attract and keep people?
I don't know. I don't know if it's a similar problem elsewhere. I have lots of friends here, for example, who are really keen to go to America because of the difference in pay and also the difference in how medicine is practiced as a trainee. The people who really just love medicine and almost the reason that they're put off in the NHS is not actually the working conditions or the pay. It's well, actually, I feel like I just do admin all day. I don't feel like I'm practicing medicine. They go to America and seem to have a completely different experience. But I'm not, I kind of don't know enough about other systems to know if it's the same elsewhere.
Yeah, I was just curious, really. I think you're right. The way we practice medicine in this country is vastly different. And one topic and idea that keeps coming up time and time again with the people that I speak to is I wanted to go into medicine to help people, to become a GP, to become a psychologist, but I'm not able to practice in the way that I thought I would be able to, given the restraints of a system that is clearly breaking. And I think that's the crux of it, is that people are not allowed to practice or not able to practice in the way they want. Most people, right, become doctors because they want to help ultimately. And I think when that is taken away, that's when people start to move on and do something else. What does it actually look like for you? What does a working day look like for you now?
So we've got a office just outside London. So all throughout medical school, the full team was remote, basically. I got to a point where I had kind of anywhere between 8 and 10 freelancers working alongside me. in the business. And I made a conscious decision. I did a lot of work on what I actually want from a values perspective and what I want my working day to look like, what I want my year to look like. And I made the decision that I'm very happy to take the financial hit of having an office and having equipment in order to build an in-person team. So there's 4 of us now that work here, 3 full time, 1 part time in the office, and it's essentially a 9 to 5 day, roughly. I come in a bit earlier than that, and sometimes leave a bit later, and of course have to work in the evening as every business owner does. um, but it's still quite flexible, I would say, in terms of if I don't want to work in the evening because I want to go do something, then that's fine. If I want to come in a bit later, I have the ability to do that. But a lot of the end of the day stuff at the moment for me is focused on team training and sales rather than on kind of client delivery at the moment.
Interesting. Just go back a step for me. You said that you were very clear about the values you wanted, what your date wanted to look like, and the year. How did you arrive at those values? How did you plan what a day and a year might actually look like? Just talk me through the process there.
I've always been very keen on kind of designing your life how you want it to be and knowing exactly what drives you, what you're motivated by, what kind of removes energy from you. I did a lot of work on what my core values might be, the things that push me most. And what came up consistently was freedom for me. That's the main thing for me. I'm very willing to sacrifice kind of status or financial gain so long as I feel free in what I'm doing. And that looks different for different people. Some people would look at an entrepreneur and say, you're absolutely not free. You have to work 16 hours a day sometimes. But for me, it certainly is that. So it became, this is what I kind of index towards is freedom and my definition of freedom. And so for me, that means XYZ, meaning over the summer, I'm very able to go and travel and do what I want to do without having to ask for permission to be able to do that. That's because what I often compared it to was if I don't want the medical career, I can quite easily get a non-clinical consultant role in London somewhere. But that would be the opposite of freedom because that's essentially the same as working as a doctor, but almost even with more constraints on what you're doing.
I think the one word there is freedom. And that, I think, outweighs everything else. And it's that choice. And you're right. Some people would look and say, well, actually, hang on, but you work evenings, maybe you work weekends, you're kind of always at the end of the phone, always at the end of email, but it's still your choice whether you do anything about that. Whereas you're right, go work in the city at a traditional 9 to 5, you have to ask for permission to go on annual leave. There's bereavement in the family. You have to kind of ask permission to go to that. Kids are sick. It just is. There is no freedom in that, despite maybe having 6, 7 figure salary. Just doesn't. There is no freedom. What is it that zaps your energy, and you try and stay away from?
Anything that imposes on that freedom side of things, basically. So I really enjoy conversations with clients, but if I look at my calendar and it's filled back to back with meetings, that kind of hinders on my that index towards freedom that I have. I'll start to say, hold on a second, this isn't exactly the day that I would plan if I was able to plan a day, especially on calls, meetings with clients. That kind of just drains energy for me. The other thing that might drain energy is if I felt the need to be super responsive out of hours. So I don't mind working out of hours, but if people started to expect a very quick turnaround and answer at 8 p.m., that would then kind of light that bit of me that says, hold on a second, this isn't why you've built the business. You've built the business in order to have freedom. If this particular client is now making you feel less free in what you're doing, you need to review that client relationship because this isn't why you've built the business, basically.
I think a lot of people struggle with that because it's very easy early days, isn't it? To say, yes, 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 I'll do it. That client's calling at 9 o'clock in the evening. Yeah, I'll just answer it. And then you set that precedence for it. Do you set out those boundaries and that expectation with your clients from a very early stage?
I didn't initially, so especially when I was at medical school, you can imagine all of my communications had to be in the evening, right? As I'm kind of growing a bit older and maturing into this more, I've understood the ability of the necessity to do that more, especially with hiring people who've got more experience than me in kind of agency work where they've said, you can't answer that. You can't be the person who's doing this because they will now feel like they've got a direct line to you whenever they want it. So certainly got better at doing it. when clients haven't kind of respected that, again, I keep saying, I index very heavily towards this freedom piece. So I'm very willing to let go a client who might be paying us £1,000 or £2,000 per month, because it, in my mind, the thing that's best for the business is always whatever continues to drive it forward, and I need to be in the right headspace for that.
Absolutely. And I'm sure you've come across those clients who expect so much from you, but pay probably less than maybe another client who just gets on with it and lets you work the process.
It's always the way, isn't it? The people who pay less typically end up taking up more time.
Yeah. The standard 80/20 rule, right, seems to
Yeah.
apply. And I think we've all been there with those clients. What's the team that you have in place around you? You said there's 4 members of staff in your office with you. What functions do they have and how do they help you day to day?
So I'm including myself in one of the 4. So I'm here. Kendall, who sits opposite me, is Google Ads specialist. So that's a very specialist role where it's difficult to train for the role. So deliberately went and found someone who was already very good at it. Shruti, who was my first hire, was initially brought on as like any first hire, ended up doing everything basically, but core function was marketing lead / account manager. So freeing up my calendar on a lot of those calls, taken over a lot of the daily communications, and then now moving into a role where she's also overseeing marketing strategy. And then Izzy, we've just hired as a marketing assistant, so kind of serving several functions across the business, but mostly aiding everything else that we're doing.
You instill in them the core values that you have? Because I know, having had staff in previous roles myself, when it's your own business, there is no one who is as passionate a believer about what you're doing. I think that's very hard to disseminate that. So how do you go about that?
I'm very clear on what I believe in from a values perspective and what I want the company to look like. I think that's probably the first piece that I got very clear on it. During the hiring process, also making it very clear what they were coming into. And then we have one-to-one sessions very regularly where I will continue to talk through, this is what we want, this is the expectations that we have, this is who we work with and who we don't. And then we also do quarterly goal setting and objective setting, where it's another chance for that kind of reminder. But I think probably most importantly is how I show up, because I am going to be the person who they look at as the kind of embodiment of those supposed values. So I can't, even if I did everything else, if I then don't seem to act in alignment with it, then it's all kind of pointless.
Absolutely vital, isn't it, that you show up in the way that they would expect you to as the leader and the authority figure within an organization. A few months ago, you talked about hiring people who know more than you do. Doctors can be quite an arrogant bunch. I think that's probably a fair assumption, and rightly so in many respects, right? I think, work hard. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of pressure. So I fully appreciate that. How do you break down some of those barriers with your clients? And what are your thoughts on that? When they think that they know better, how do you convince them that actually there is more to it than they may originally think?
So from a business perspective, I see it as my job to weed out those people in the discovery process and then not work with them um, deliberately, because I very much see this as we probably reject as many people in the discovery process as people who we might send an offer to work with, because I know I'm been doing this long enough, know that I know how difficult it is to work with particular clients when it can be quite easy with others. And it ends up being a negative relationship both ways. They don't feel like they're getting what they asked for. We feel like they're getting more than what we should be giving them almost. So there's a level of, actually, if it doesn't seem like their mind will be changed, and we actually come up against this quite a lot, where they've maybe worked with other marketing providers before and now they think that they know everything that there is to know about marketing and what needs to be done. If I get a sense of that, I just kind of say no thanks. It doesn't look like we're going to be able to work together. If it's an existing client, we typically don't come up against that, because we can say, here's why we think this, it'll work. And often these are the people who will already kind of say, fine, like, go ahead and do it.
And again, I think that comes with the maturity of having a business for a period of time where you realize you can say no to people. It's okay to have those discovery calls and weed out and say, I'm sorry, but we are not a good fit for each other. Thanks very much. On you go. I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make in business early on is just saying yes to everybody, not having that clear identification. How long did it take for you to have that really defined, clear opportunity of who you wanted to work with?
I think it's an ongoing process, to be honest. I think it's something that always shifts. I think during medical school, if you told me you were a healthcare business in some capacity and you wanted marketing support, I would have said, yes, let's do it, regardless of what it was. If you needed something new, I would have taught myself how to do it and worked out how to be the best at it. And then I would have delivered on that service. I think what's changed hugely is since hiring my first in-person hire, it's now no longer about what I can do. It's about what a team can do and what a team can do at scale. That's certainly shifted the perspective towards who do our ideal customers actually look like? What do they do? What do they say? What services do they need? What services can we provide for them? Because it's also very easy when you're the business owner to just identify a problem that someone might have and say, well, I could fix that. I could jump in and fix that, but actually I'll give the rest of the team a headache and the business will stop growing. So
Hands up, guilty of that one on occasion, that's for sure. Easy to go, oh, look, today's problem is let's fix that and then forget everything that you've done. You work with clinic owners who are obviously clinically brilliant, maybe starting out their own private organization on their own. What's the single most common mistake that you see them making with regards to patient acquisition?
for clinic owners, I always explain it as there's 3 different stages to patient acquisition. There's getting people to your website, so having people find out who you are at all, never heard of you before. Then there's getting them to convert once they land on your website. So actually leave an inquiry, send an email, make a phone call. Then there's, okay, now they've done all that, but have you put the systems and processes in place so that when they make the inquiry, they actually book in? The main mistake people make is just not looking at it like that because they obviously have not done marketing before kind of patient acquisition. What they typically end up doing is, well, we'll throw some money at ads, but they kind of don't know what problem they might solve by doing that, or they do some local leaflet drops, but again, they're not exactly sure what the strategy behind that is. So they kind of end up in this scenario where some of the super ambitious owners might even spend thousands of pounds on ads, but then they kind of say, well, we got loads of traffic and traction, but nothing came from it. I think it's probably the strategy behind it because they maybe haven't done much marketing before. It's the not being able to take a step back and go, here's what the long term play is, here's what problem I'm solving through each of these different marketing functions. Um, what happens instead is they just start posting on social media maybe, and then aren't exactly sure why that hasn't filled their calendar because they haven't thought about why it might or might not.
Throw it and see what sticks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a really important point. When they get those clients, patients, customers, do you find they struggle then to go back for repeat business? Now, obviously, not all clinics will have repeat customer of some description, but a lot will. Do you think people struggle to get that repeat custom or ask for the repeat business?
Most of the clinics we work with so they might be private GPs, but often they're private medical consultants or surgical consultants, whereby it's not something like physio, chiropractor, where it is very much you need 6 or 8 sessions sort of thing, or, in order to kind of make sense financially. So it's not a problem that we come up against very often. I notice a similar problem sometimes from consultation to surgery booking, whereby people think they've kind of made the sale once a patient comes in for a consultation, but they don't actually have someone waiting at the end of the door to say, well, do you now want to book in for the actual surgery? And then they sometimes get lost. So there is a bit of that we see.
Do you think some of that is because there is real worry about asking patients for money in a system where healthcare is predominantly free?
I see that less now. Like an actual fear of asking the patient and a fear of coming across the wrong way. But I will say that's mostly because the people who we speak to are they might be new clinics, but often they're kind of somewhere between being new and established, small to medium sized. So they're no longer in that, oh, I don't want to ask. They're in the, I need new patients quick and I need things to happen. It's more of maybe a commercial awareness point of, well, that's actually a system that you should have in place, rather than I'm afraid to do it thing, I think. But we see people be afraid to call a patient or have their team call a patient because they don't want to seem like they're bothering someone or kind of interrupting their day. We see that, and that maybe that's aligned with the, if they want to book, they'll book sort of attitude.
Yeah. I've worked in the private sector myself, and it's very interesting when you see people cross over from the NHS to private. And as a radiographer, I worked, and seeing some of that transition and trying to get people to understand that actually you need the patients to pay in order to run this amazing, fantastic facility that we have, and they're choosing to come here. So it's, I think it's so hard when the NHS is so fearful, I think, of money and talking about money. And I remember I returned to clinical practice after a break in the commercial world. And I think I went for my flu jab, and the nurse was in this room. We had banners, stickers, all sorts of like promo stuff. And I laughed. They said, "It's no wonder the NHS has no money." And she just looked at me, she said, "It was all free." I was like, yeah, okay, so you haven't paid for it, but somewhere along the line, someone has paid for it. And I think that's the attitude that I think people really struggle with, because it's not in our nature when we come from that free system. What are your thoughts on private medicine as a whole?
It's a difficult one. I certainly grew up never accessing private healthcare at all, always accessing NHS care. Um, I think the difficulty moving forward is that I don't know about most, but a lot of people have certainly lost confidence in public healthcare, NHS. Myself, as an example, if I'm thinking, oh, I might need to get a blood test done, it almost doesn't cross my mind now to try and book in with an NHS GP, because I just feel like it's going to be a bit of a nightmare trying to get it booked in. When I was in Plymouth, actually, I was able to do it a bit easier, but since I've moved here, even I'm kind of like, it's such a hassle. I feel like I'll be taking up someone else's place who might need it more than I do. And if I can maybe afford to go and pay for it, there's this kind of weird sort of perception of, if you don't absolutely need to use it, you shouldn't. But then it's supposed to be there for everyone. So it's in a strange place.
I agree. I think we're in a very tough situation where the system is clearly broken, overloaded, and there are people who can afford to go and have a private blood test, for example. And I'm all for that. It may not be fair, it may not be right, but that is the situation that we're in. I see it like anything, private medical insurance, private schooling. If you've got the wherewithal for it, then actually why not use it and alleviate some of that stress? And that's the bit that I think always winds me up a little bit, is where people don't see that actually you are alleviating a system that is really, really struggling. And it would just help a little bit to have some of those people removed from that system. Going back then to when you first started, and you've left medical school, you've started your business, obviously it was making some money. What was the biggest fear for you moving forward with that, around money and what your future might look like financially?
I'm in a fortunate position where I don't have a mortgage, don't have any children. So I'm kind of, I lack any sort of dependence or any real overheads that are extremely, that I have to really factor in the decision making, I would say. So I didn't really have much of a fear of what if this doesn't work. I have this view of business and view of anything that we do, whereby you are kind of the product of the journey that you're going on, not the actual business that you build, not the thing that is created. So I've always got in the back of my head, well, if something goes drastically wrong, I manage this incorrectly, I end up, revenue is quarter of what it needs to be. I'm always kind of like, well, in the broader context, then I'll just learn more and trying to rebuild from that, rather than it being something disastrous. Obviously, that conversation changes entirely if you've got 3 kids or something. But I'm fortunate that I can be a bit more bold and take a few more risks at the moment.
I think, look, it does. Of course, it changes. I think mortgage, kids. I can give you some kids if you want to look after them. They'll need jobs. It's fine. It does change the scope. But actually, what you're talking about there, and just going for it, having that thought that you are in control. I think that's the same whether you have those dependencies or not. Because if you don't have that self-belief, then it is really hard. How do you manage and how do you cope at rock bottom or when you're having a bad day? Because we all have them. And I think the reality is sometimes you wake up, just everything feels a bit crappy, and maybe you've lost sale, haven't won something, there's not money coming in. How do you take stock of the situation and move that forward into being positive?
I think in general, I'm quite really interested in stoicism as a philosophy. So I'm very neutral, I would say, quite often. I don't have very many very large up or downs that I might like express outwardly or really impact me. But I went through a period just at the start of this year, kind of Q1, where things were very rocky. And even I was kind of going, hold on a minute, this is impacting you way more than it typically would. What's going on? I have a few friends who are business owners, much more experienced than I am, and I pay for mentorship through other business coaches as well. Because I think in times like that, you need a third party who is entirely objective to say, well, this isn't you speaking. Like, you're having a bad day, you're having a bad week, get through it, go take a break for a weekend, do whatever you need to do. 'Cause without that external input, could have very easily started questioning what I was building, started questioning what I was doing. Whereas actually what I just needed was someone to kind of go, you're having a rough week, a rough month. It's fine. Don't let this the actual exact scenario was that I was like goal setting for Q1 or Q2. Um, and I had set pretty like unambitious goals, whereas I would usually be like, we can take this huge, we can build something big. And the person was like, hold on a minute, this doesn't sound like you're kind of in the right state of mind. But I'm just saying, that made me go, oh yeah, you're right. Actually, this all sounds a bit not like me. I might need to go take a break, take some time away. So it's just that having people around you whose opinion you respect and who know you quite well and can be quite objective when you might not be. Because if you're having a bad day, you're not being objective, you're being emotional, which is fine, but it's not the state where you want to be making long-term decisions.
Agreed. How did you find your mentor?
I've had a few. The current kind of group that I'm working with of business owners, they reached out to me on LinkedIn, as the kind of a group for young entrepreneurs specifically. So they reached out. I was always a bit skeptical about the idea of business mentorship. My whole thing was, if I'm going to get business mentorship, you need to actively be running a business that's bigger than mine, essentially. I think I had two conversations with them over a year, and I was still like, "Oh, I don't know about this, really don't know about it." And then kind of finally gave in and was like, all right, I'll give it a go. And then it's been game changing. Just having other people around you who are dealing with the same problems, but at different levels or different scales. When you're like, two clients churn, you wake up, another one has left, the sale doesn't go through, and you're like, this is catastrophic. And they're like, oh, it's fine. I've lost 3 businesses before. It's not it's not an issue.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I think having that support is so important. That's why I was interested to know how you went through that kind of selection process, because I think a lot of people are quite negative, like you were, towards having mentorship. And some of that comes back to that I'm doing what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. I understand my field. Nobody gets it like I do. And what you soon realize is that actually you can't do it all on your own. You have to have someone fighting your corner and to pick you up. As stoic as you want to be and level, we all have those days where it drops off. And actually, even the opposite, where you're completely manic and you're like, oh, I'm going to smash it. And I go, hang on. Like we were just saying, I'm going to fix today's problem. And like, stop. Just wait a second. Deal with what you're doing. Let's carry on. And then look at that down the line and setting those goals.
Yeah. I think that's especially important for people who just start off in business. I can't remember who the quote is from, Naval Ravikant maybe, but he speaks about how you can tell a first time founder from someone who's on their third or fourth business, because a first time founder doesn't typically want to talk about their business because they think that they've got it sorted and they don't want people stealing their idea. Whereas you talk to like a third or fourth and they just want to tell everyone because they're like, can people help, please? Like, can someone tell me what I should be doing? I've noticed that a lot more. I'm very much like, I no longer have the uninformed optimism. I'm at this is hard. Can people tell me what I should be doing?
Yeah, please help. Like, I'm longing for some suggestions as how to fix X, Y, and Z, and tell everybody. I'll tell everybody what I do. There's no problem with that whatsoever. And it really makes me chuckle. Actually, I've spoken to a few people. Like, well, I can't really tell you what I'm doing. It's a bit of a secret. It's going to be the next best thing. I doubt it. In all fairness, I'd be surprised. There's very little original thought out there. You can protect it all you want, but someone somewhere is going to have come up with it. You just need to find a way of doing it better. 2026 seems to be very set really on personal brand over business branding, etc. What are your thoughts on someone building a personal brand in the current climate over building maybe a business brand?
I was recommended a book about 3 years ago, whilst I was still at medical school, by a client that I was working with at the time and still work with, key person of influence. by Daniel
Daniel
Priestley.
Priestley. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had a read of that, and from that, I was like, "Oh, this makes so much sense." And I remember the quote in my head was always that no one follows what Facebook do or Meta; everyone follows what Zuckerberg does. So I think I literally started posting on LinkedIn from that, and I actually looked at it over the Easter break. 50% of the clients we've ever had have come direct to me through LinkedIn. I have a page for the company and it grows. People follow it, but I haven't posted anything on it in years. It is very much about who you are and the brand that you have. It's not about the business. People forget about the company name, the business name. I'm very much in line with this. You build a brand and then your brand is separate almost from the company. Like if you build a brand that's large enough, almost whatever you decide to do with it will be successful and you can kind of move in different ways. Obviously, especially important in my case because our business is that it's doctor led and my brand is all around being a doctor who does marketing.
And that goes right back, doesn't it, to the beginning where you said having those letters, being able to relate to your audience, that lived experience, the authority that you bring absolutely is so crucial to everything you do. I love the fact you mentioned Daniel Priestley, probably one of my absolute favorite leaders or figures, key person of influence, absolutely changed my life, actually. His books are over there, not behind me. Uh, and I constantly look at what he's doing and try and understand it. Because I think he speaks on a level that is slightly different. Look, up there, I've got Grant Cardone, people like that, who are amazing, right? Great business people, but way different to me. Never, like, I don't want to work that hard. If I'm entirely honest, I don't want to work that hard. But on private jet, maybe, I just don't want. Yeah, I've got 4 kids. I can't, I don't want to take that time away. Daniel Priestley, I think, just has it very well laid out around what people want to hear, how they want to hear it. And I think everything he does just makes a lot of sense to me, and how I kind of live it. And yeah, to be that key person of influence, I think is what people should be aiming for. And like you, I've got a business page on LinkedIn. I gave up posting on it a long time ago because I realized that actually it's me, it's my experience that is so important. If people are looking to exit healthcare, so let's say that scenario, the consultant said to you, "I'll stick around for another 10, 15 years, then decide what you want to do." That does happen. That's my space. That's the people that I deal with across healthcare. What advice would you give to them about taking that step away from healthcare?
I had a call over Easter, 2 calls over Easter with doctors who were interested in stepping away. And what it kind of boiled down to for me was, why do you want to step away? Like you need to get extremely clear on why you want to do it. Otherwise, it's a very difficult thing to do. I keep talking about this, but it is very important that like the values piece and why you might make a decision, because if I know truly what drives me to make decisions, what drives me to live a particular life, then making the decision to me, which is to not do foundation training, not work as a doctor, is actually very easy. Like I didn't really have any doubts about it. Whereas if I hadn't done that work and it was just an idea, that becomes a much more difficult conversation to have with conviction. So there's that part of it, which is to kind of truly think about why you want to do this. Is it financially driven? Is it purpose driven? Is it freedom related? Whatever it might be, and kind of get clear on that. The next thing then is what I did, which is don't try and jump ship right away. Like try and work out what you might do and have like an exit strategy almost. Um, it's already a pretty daunting thing to do. It would be extremely daunting to just decide at the end of the week that you're going to go full time into whatever this new thing is. Much easier to set some foundations up and kind of test an idea and say, well, actually, I could do this and jump into it, because that also makes all the conversations around you much easier. And that's, I think often the thing that holds people back is they're kind of they're living the life that someone else wants them to live from a career perspective, not necessarily what they actually would truly want to do. So you need to have the conviction to work out why that's the case, and then also the practical. I'm setting this up in a way that it's not stupid, or I'm not doing something really crazy by going and doing something different.
Yeah. Spot on. I think, yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's so important. And coming from someone with your knowledge and your skills, I think that's so good to hear. I created something called a personal exit plan for people for that very reason. I walked out of a job. I was working in Harley Street and I left. And it all worked out in the end, but it was pretty scary, dicey, and I would never recommend anyone just quits. So having that side-by-side testing the waters, and you're making sure you know what it is that you really want and why. And that conviction again, knowing that you can do it even when you've got your friends, your family saying, why are you doing it? What are you leaving for? You've got a good job, you've got status, you've got identity. Why are you leaving? That conviction is so important. The skills that you learn as a medic can seem quite closed off. I know you haven't worked clinically per se, but obviously there are a lot of skills that you have. What do you say to the medics and the healthcare professionals who think that their time in healthcare would be wasted if they were to leave because that's the only skills they have?
I'm slightly biased with this because I went through medical school, but I think it's truly the best kind of boot camp that you can go through, where this, regardless of what you end up doing after medicine, people ask me all the time, would you do medicine again? And I'm like, absolutely. Even if I knew what I was going to do afterwards, I would still do it, because you get this, you get a boot camp in time management, in decision making, in communication skills, which I don't think you can get elsewhere in that sort of 5-year intensive period, or will be very difficult to replicate elsewhere. You have exams almost constantly. You're living under this. You're trying to balance sleep, trying to balance building a portfolio, trying to do 101 things, which you don't get anywhere else, I don't think, in that kind of period of time, especially when you're maybe in your 20s. So there's that. I think the kind of hard skills of, depending on what specialty someone has gone into, can be transferable in some way, depending on what role they want to go into that's non-directly clinical. I was having a conversation with a doctor, a client that we work with, and he said, well, it's a bit different if you've gone through medicine, like, you know how to work hard. So his response was, he was like, you understand hard work a bit differently because you have that boot camp of just real hard work for 5 years. I think that's actually a really valuable thing, more so than any of the clinical side of things.
What you've just described is basically being an entrepreneur and having your own business, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the same
Spot on.
kind of, the same arena, just slightly different.
And I think when people have worked in it, they just lose track of that because you get so stuck in what you do. Maybe it's a specialty or, just the day-to-day humdrum of doing stuff. You just get stuck. And I think people feel that actually they don't really have any skills beyond what they're doing. Forget that time in medical school where actually you were doing all of it. What's next for you and the business? What's going to happen in the next 3 years?
My original plan when I graduated was to get this office full of people. It's now full of people. So the next thing that we'll do is continue to work, continue to grow, and work with new clients, move more centrally in London. I have this kind of vision of just having a big office floor in one of the kind of obnoxious London buildings. So we'll just continue to work towards doing that.
Oh, well, I wish you all the very best with it. And thank you for sharing some of your journey and story with me. I think it's always important for people to understand that there are different routes available to them and that they can go wherever they want to go if they have the conviction and the values and that drive, which you clearly have in absolute bucket loads. Tiarnan, thank you so much. I really appreciate you, really appreciate your time, and I wish you all the very best over the next few years.
Thanks so much. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Cheers. Take care.